Look, I could be a lot more blunt about it because President Trump cannot, right? Clearly, the arrest of Maduro, that was done under the guise of a drug trafficking conviction, right? The larger pullback picture is that he wanted the oil companies to go back into Venezuela and secure whatever deals they had prior to the president coming into office, his second term. That's the guise of all of this because it makes the news that way. It gives a narrative. But the reality is, anyone can see this pretty clearly. We want to secure oil and we want to secure it for the United States.
A Republican delegate from Florida came on British television to celebrate the removal of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. Lewis Goodall asked her a simple question about the legal basis for going into a sovereign country and taking its leader by force without an extradition treaty. She called it a very, very special extradition. Then she admitted Trump does not play by the rules and nobody is going to challenge him. Then she admitted the same logic could theoretically allow Putin to conduct his own special extradition of Zelensky to Moscow. Then she said she could be blunt about it and told Goodall that the entire drug trafficking case was just a guise, a cover story, and what this was actually about was securing Venezuelan oil for American companies. She said the quiet part out loud on British television. To Lewis Goodall, this is Fool's Ballot. Subscribe if you're not already there. Now let us get into it.
The view now from Florida and from the United States with Angie Wong, who's US political commentator, Republican delegate from Florida, all been celebrating, we understand, Maduro's capture on the streets of Florida in the last 24 hours. Angie, lovely to speak to you. Why have you been celebrating Maduro's capture?
Good morning, Lewis. Yes, we've been celebrating for over 24 hours now. As soon as the news broke here on the East Coast at 2 a.m. yesterday, we heard cars honking, we saw music blasting, and that's typical night in Miami, of course, but this was different. This was people lining up in Little Havana, going to Doral in Florida, and flying Venezuelan flags, and it was great. So I was part of that yesterday morning and been reporting on it. It's been so glorious because we have so many Venezuelan refugees here, and so many have fled with literally nothing. I have a barista that I loved going to. Her family was very wealthy in Venezuela 10 years ago, and now she is working at a coffee shop because she's lost everything. So we hear stories like that over and over again. So they were just loving this because, once again, President Trump delivered.
There is a lot of concern in Europe and in the UK this morning, Angie, and there will be in the United States as well. Not from you and the people celebrating, perhaps, but from others. Not so much about the ends. No one really thinks that Maduro should have stayed in place. He was an illegitimate dictator. He'd subverted elections and so on. But about the means, about going in to a sovereign country in this way and abducting a foreign leader in this manner, the legal basis for that. Do you not have any concerns about that at all and the precedent that it sets?
Yes, and yesterday morning when I first heard the news break, I was thinking, well, why did the U.S. reach out to NATO? Why didn't we look into our allies so that we weren't the only ones going in? But then when you look at the legal basis of why Maduro and his wife was arrested, it was based on drug charges pending in the U.S. So they were convicted under Joe Biden in 2020 in the Southern District Court in New York, which I'm very familiar with. It's in Brooklyn. And they were then essentially extradited from Caracas to go to New York to face these charges. So that's what's happening here.
Well, they weren't really extradited, were they, Angie? I mean, an extradition implies a legal basis for that and a treaty between two countries. Your country kidnapped them.
Listen, we've been throwing around that word a lot, but apparently it is very legal. And I've actually seen this happen with much smaller players going into Costa Rica and going into Colombia.
They weren't extradited, were they? They weren't extradited. They were abducted.
This was a very, very special extradition. Let's put it that way. Now, I mean, look, I agree with you. I think, in all fairness, I think that the UK, I think Starmer said it right, and other world leaders have said, look, this is going against international laws. And I think that's going to be tested. But who's going to test that? Right? Which court of law is actually going to bring in the Trump administration to stress test whether or not there was a kidnapping or anything beyond an extradition? I don't know. And quite honestly, I don't know if they'll care, because now what you've seen is that you've been seeing celebrations around the world from freed Venezuelans.
So is it okay that the United States gets, because of its power and because you've got this extraordinary military and you've got this extraordinary might, it's okay that the United States is judge, jury, and executioner over everything that it does. And it could do this, as President Trump has said, it could do it again with other leaders. Is that a good thing?
And that's the messaging, isn't it? That is sending a message to Russia, to China, to Iran, to Colombia, who just closed its borders, to Cuba, to anyone who is an adversary to the U.S. And that's exactly what Marco Rubio, President Trump, and Pete Hegseth wanted to give out.
Well,
Look, is it okay? Of course not. I don't believe so. I just said, I think the UN, NATO, perhaps even other allies, maybe the UK could have joined in on this. But they didn't.
But it could send a different message, couldn't it, Angie? It could send a message to Beijing and to Moscow that as long as you've got the military clout, you can do whatever you want, and that you could do something like this as well. What is to stop President Putin deciding, well, actually, it's in our national security interest, we're going to try President Zelensky in a Moscow court, and then, when we're able to, and when we've got the military capability, we're going to conduct our own special military operation, so to speak, a special extradition, so to speak, and remove him to Moscow and put him on trial. What's to stop them doing that?
There's nothing stopping except for all the European leaders that will make sure that never happens, right? And also NATO. I mean, there are plenty of protective walls around Zelensky.
The thing that stops, or the argument would be, the thing that stops that from happening is that everybody, even if you've got the power to do that, you don't do it because we have some degree of international rulemaking around this that says you don't. And your president just blew that to bits.
That's correct. And I've seen him time and time again. I've been covering this guy for over 6 years now, and he does not play by the rules. He understands, after all the lawfare that him and his family has gone through during the Joe Biden years, that he is just going to do things, and then you catch him. And I think, look, it is definitely unorthodox, but he's doing it. And right now, he's winning the messaging on it. He's winning the narrative on it. And who's going to challenge him? So far, none of his allies, other than Russia stepping up saying something. I think Nigel Farage said something, then took it back. I mean, no one is actually going to challenge this guy because they removed the problem. The U.S. removed a problem. We're not installing a leader. We just removed a problem. And hopefully there'll be elections in Caracas and all over Venezuela soon to elect a real
Only if Trump
leader.
Likes that leader. He made it pretty clear yesterday that whoever that leader is has got to be a leader that he approves of. What kind of message is that to the people of Venezuela? Don't they deserve to choose?
Well, they're going to have elections, right? So they were hoping that the Vice President Rodriguez would stay on, but she fled, apparently. That's the rumor, that she fled to Russia. That's not confirmed, by the way, but I have heard several sources say that. So there's really, it's going to be another Haiti if we're not careful, where all the parliament just fled the country. There's no quorum to actually hold elections. So he's going to ensure that something happens. And look, the whole world is watching him. We're not going to take over Venezuela as another United States, right? This is not going to be in addition to what we're doing. But yes, of course, I'm sure President Trump will control some of the levers on the political front, especially with the incoming leader. There's a lot of special interests there, especially oil for the U.S., and we are very cognizant of that. But again, I think Marco Rubio is a little bit scared that he's going to take on another job this morning and become the president or the temporary president of Venezuela.
Should we be concerned that this president isn't going to stop at Venezuela? We saw the wife of the Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, Stephen Miller, tweet out a picture of Greenland with an American flag emblazoned on it saying "soon" in capital letters. Is the US coming for Greenland?
Oh, 100%. President Trump pretty much on day one wanted Greenland. Remember, he also wanted Canada. He also wants the Panama Canal. Look, you can't not call this guy a modern day imperialist, right? He wants the same thing that Putin wants, that Xi Jinping wants, that even Bibi Netanyahu wants. They want more land. And right now, I don't think anyone is pushing to stop him, but he's not going into wars necessarily. He's not like Putin going in and just bringing in the troops across the border. He's trying to make a deal, and whether or not that deal is successful, we're not sure. But we know that the envoy working on Greenland, this is not going to be boots on the ground. We're not invading. This is certainly more an art of the deal president who's going to do something, hopefully, to secure Greenland.
Does it depress you, Angie? Does it not depress you that many of us around the world, many in America, always thought that perhaps America was rather better than this, that America wasn't imperialist, that America won over the rest of the world because of her ideas and the principles that your country stood for. And instead, you're basically talking about your president and your country in the same breath and in the same way, with the same ends and the same means as the Xis and the Putins and the Chinas and the Russias of the world. Is that not rather depressing?
No, we just want to be more like the Brits here, right? We want to have more land and we want to have more resources.
You want to be more like the British Empire?
Sure. Only because, look, we're coming on to our 250-year anniversary of America this year. And what happens with a lot of these empires is that it plateaus. In fact, the United States, we've pretty much, like, where else are we going to go? We have only a limited amount of resources, only a limited amount of land. We need a lot of energy to go into the next phase of the industrial revolution, which is AI, right? And to be competitive, we need to have those energy sources. We may have some of them, we may have some rare earths, but we need more if we're going to be dominant. And I think that's what's happening here. It's a longer discussion, but that is what President Trump is trying to procure, because guess what? China has already procured that. So Russia is procuring that.
So because you need extra resources, that gives you the right to go and procure them by any means necessary.
Well, it's not by any means necessary. This is a different style of procurement, but isn't that how it goes? Isn't that how all of these conflicts begin? But we're not looking to start wars.
Your President Jefferson once described the United States as being an empire of liberty. Doesn't sound very much like that anymore. It just sounds like a good old-fashioned empire, the way you're talking about it.
Look, I could be a lot more blunt about it because President Trump cannot, right? Clearly, the arrest of Maduro, that was done under the guise of a drug trafficking conviction, right? The larger pullback picture is that he wanted the oil companies to go back into Venezuela and secure whatever deals they had prior to the president coming into office, his second term. That's the guise of all of this, because it makes the news that way. It gives a narrative. But the reality is, anyone can see this pretty clearly. We want to secure oil and we want to secure it for the United States.
Let us be clear about what actually happened in that interview, because the final admission is so extraordinary that it deserves to be understood in full context rather than reduced to a clip. Angie Wong did not slip up. She did not accidentally reveal something she did not mean to say. She said it deliberately because she thought she was bragging. That distinction matters enormously. She told Goodall that she could be more blunt than Trump can be publicly, and then proceeded to explain that the arrest of Maduro under drug trafficking charges was done under the guise of those charges. That the larger picture is that Trump wanted American oil companies to go back into Venezuela and secure whatever deals they had before his second term, and that this is the reality that anyone can see clearly. Those are her words. Guise, reality. Anyone can see it. She was not confessing to something she considered wrong. She was explaining the strategy with pride because from her perspective, it is a successful and clever piece of geopolitical maneuvering. The problem is that what she described is the use of a judicial process as a cover story for a resource acquisition operation conducted by going into a sovereign country and removing its leader by force. That is not a minor legal irregularity. That is something with a very specific name in international law. The extradition language collapse is where the interview first reveals itself clearly. Goodall pointed out that what happened was not an extradition. An extradition requires a legal basis and a treaty between countries. No such treaty exists between the United States and Venezuela. Wong initially tried to defend the legal framing by citing the drug charges filed in New York. Goodall pushed back immediately. They were not extradited. They were abducted. And Wong could not maintain the legal framing for long. Within a few exchanges, she called it a very, very special extradition, which is a phrase that means we know it was not really an extradition, but we are not going to say so directly. And then when Goodall asked who was going to test whether it was legal, Wong's answer was essentially nobody, because nobody has the power to hold Trump accountable for it. And that is the admission that should concern everyone. Then there is the Putin parallel, which Wong also could not dismiss. Goodall asked what stops Putin deciding to conduct his own special extradition of Zelensky to Moscow and try him in a Russian court. Wong said there were protective walls around the landscape, meaning NATO and European leaders. Goodall pointed out that the argument against Putin doing that is not American military power, but the existence of international rules that say, even if you have the capability to do something, you do not do it. And then said Trump just blew that to bits. Wong said that is correct. She agreed. She said Trump does not play by the rules, and he is doing it, and right now he is winning the messaging on it, and nobody is challenging him. That is a Republican delegate openly acknowledging that the President of the United States has dismantled the international legal framework that has prevented the law of the jungle from governing relations between states since the end of the Second World War. And she said it without apparent concern, because from her perspective, winning the messaging is what matters. Then there is the empire moment. Goodall asked whether it depresses Wong that America, a country that always presented itself as different from imperial powers, as a nation that won the world over through ideas and principles rather than territorial acquisition, is now being described in the same terms as Russia and China. Wong's response was to say, well, we just want to be more like the British with their empire. Goodall immediately pushed back on that framing, pointing out that the British Empire is not generally held up as a model to aspire to. And then Wong said the quiet part out loud. She said America needs more land, more resources, more energy for the AI revolution, and that is what Trump is trying to procure. She used the word procure, for land and for oil in a sovereign country. That is not America first. That is empire building with a legal cover story. And then came the confession. Wong said she could be more blunt than Trump can be publicly. The arrest was done under the guise of drug trafficking charges. The real picture is securing Venezuelan oil for American companies. That is what this is. And she said it clearly and calmly because she thought she was explaining a clever strategy rather than admitting what would in any other era be considered an act of international aggression dressed up in judicial clothing. Goodall did not have to do anything except let her talk. He appealed to her desire to explain the real picture behind the narrative, and she did exactly that. This is Fool's Ballot. Hit the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments below, subscribe to the channel if you are not already there, and share this one as widely as you can, because what Wong said in that interview matters far beyond one television exchange. I will see you in the next one.